Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organization that I've been invited to moderate these voices. My name is Sporrer, and as already was announced, I'm in a function of a state institution. Therefore, I have to proclaim the obligatory disclaimer that everything I'm going to tell or share with you is my personal, private opinion and does not necessarily reflect also the opinion of my institution, but sometimes it does. Yes, I'm honored to share this panel on children's rights. And I'm also glad that I have these competent voices on my side. Mrs. Winkler, coming from an organization dealing with the protection of children from sexual exploitation and abuse. Mr. Amer, coming from Jordan, head of a civil society association on the development of civil society, and Mr. Mangan, coming from the UNHCR, the rights of the child, competent person. Yes. Just as I'm a lawyer, I just want to start off with the information you already will have, that children's rights are enshrined in many documents. All human rights are children's rights, first of all. And in addition to this, we have on international level the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a universal human rights document. And almost all member states of the United Nations are contractual states of this convention. And on European level, we certainly have the European Union level, we certainly have the Human Rights Charter, where also explicit rights of the child are enshrined, namely, and this is also enshrined in the UN Convention, that member states and all actors have, when dealing with child issues, have to respect the best interest of the child. This has to be borne in mind always when you talk about children's rights. Also, courts, when applying these laws, apply these principles, but as we will see then, very often practice is far from the law, how it should be applied or it should be respected. Having said so, I would like to ask Mrs. Winkler to make her first intervention here. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's working. Thank you very much. Thank you for having invited me, and let me briefly... Oh, it's a problem with the glasses. I don't need it for reading, but for seeing you clearly. So very briefly, a few words about my network or our network. The Ecpat is a network of currently 102 organizations in 93 countries, and our common goal is the ending of sexual exploitation of children in all its manifestations. So the strategy of organizations working in our network are diverse. It's advocacy, it's lobbying, it's awareness raising, campaigning, also a lot of training, and quite a few organizations also provide direct support and assistance to children. And child and youth participation is a very important goal in our organization. So on a personal note, I'm a sociologist. I was also trained as journalist a long time ago. And I did start to work on the topic of sexual exploitation in children in 2001, and for Ecpat in Austria in 2003. Time is limited. I can only pick a few issues in this short intervention, and I will focus primarily on a few aspects of my experience and that of the network. As Anna already mentioned, the UNHCR was ratified by 196 countries, and that means theoretically that these countries are binded to implement child rights, to consider the best interests of the child. Practically, there is a lot of gaps and issues which need to be addressed and solved. I just pick one. Of these 196 countries, only 53 countries, 53, banned completely corporal punishment of children in all societal settings. Millions of children are affected by worst forms of violence, such as endangering labor, sexual abuse and exploitation, early marriages, and so on and so forth. Coming to our region, I would like to focus a little bit on the wider Europe, which means EU Europe and non-EU Europe. And this is also the main area of my expertise. What are the key obstacles and challenges? On federal level, most of the countries have developed a quite good child protection framework in legal terms. That means national laws are in place nowadays, which are basically in line with the CRC, except the corporal punishment. However, when it comes to the child protection framework in practical terms, there are still a lot of deficits and gaps. For instance, competent authorities on local level very often lacking financial resources and or are not sufficiently and staff is not sufficiently and properly trained to put into practice new laws, new concepts of child protection and best interest of the child. One example, I'm currently working quite a lot in Eastern European countries and Balkan countries, and a clear decision, I mean for good reasons, has been made there to close children's homes, especially the bigger ones, as it was in the past. But the alternative systems like foster families, small units with guardians are not yet properly developed. Another key issue which I would like to highlight is the discrimination, and especially discrimination of minorities in Europe, and here especially Roma, Sinti and similar ethnic minorities. Those who suffer the most are the children. I have seen quite a few of these really European slums, and it's really heartbreaking. Due to structural discrimination in the societies, authorities often simply gave up on them, which practically means they do not care and fulfill their obligations anymore. Due to the deprived circumstances, these children are extremely vulnerable to all sorts of violence, including trafficking and exploitation for the various reasons. And if identified at all, discrimination continues also in countries like Austria or other Western European countries, where they might end up, because also here and there the authorities do not apply the child protection framework as they would do for own, quote-unquote, autochthon children. I myself have conducted several times interviews with child protection experts, and I have very often heard questions. They asked me, what shall we do with these children? I'm sure my colleague here will also target soon on the problem of guardianship systems. We have a special problem here in many European countries, and this is especially a problem for unaccompanied minors. As reports of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency and other reports clearly indicate, guardianship systems in EU member states often fail to provide adequate support and protection, especially to unaccompanied minors, including trafficked children, and Austria, unfortunately, is no exemption here. Well, And coming to relatively soon to an end, I would highlight also deficits in child protection. And also this is very crucial when it comes to refugee children, unaccompanied minors. Children have the right to be heard and to be involved. For instance, it is really necessary to inform unaccompanied minors properly in their language, in child-friendly, with child-friendly information on their rights, on regulations, on practices. It is important to provide complete and understandable information on procedures and services available to the unaccompanied child in order to facilitate awareness and clarity. For example, according to the Summit report from Missing Children Europe, the involvement of mediators with a similar cultural background speaking the language of the child have proven to simplify communication and foster understanding and trust in the care provided. And that is also a prevention for children going missing, of course. Child-friendly communication such as leaflets and videos has also demonstrated effectiveness. And that leads, I would not leave you with a negative note, to some good practice examples. And I would like to start with one from my own network. Ecpat and other organizations developed in an EU project called REACT, Reinforcing Assistance to Child Victims of Trafficking. Very good material in 13 languages, low threshold, child-friendly video, as well as leaflets. I have only a few with me, informing the children on their rights. I will provide this information to the organizers, and I'm sure there will be a documentation, and you will get the links so where you can download the videos and the leaflets. In November, the second positive example, in November 2016, Ecpat, in cooperation with the Council of Europe, did organize the first ever global forum for adult survivors of childhood sexual exploitation. A charter of rights had been developed by over 300 survivors from all parts of the world, and they agreed afterwards to meet in regional online forums. And there's the last point, which I really would like to highlight, because this is so important from my understanding. There is an increasing recognition from organizations, from institutions, and also from donors for the importance of introducing policies to safeguard children. Not so much yet from authorities, but at least from, the three players which I mentioned. So we call these policies sometimes also, or better known as child protection policies. Ecpat started to lobbying for and promoting the implementation of such policies together with other organizations like UNICEF and Save the Children already in 2004. And we do see really positive results in Europe and worldwide. Our network and others have gained a lot of experience in providing support and expertise to other organizations in developing and implementing such safeguarding policies. And I would say this is one step which is also very important to put child rights into practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important input on one of the most severe infringements of children's human rights, namely sexual exploitation and abuse. As the next speaker, I would like to welcome Mr. Amer, coming from Jordan, and he will talk about the role of the youth in developing civil society.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to start just giving a very a quick highlight about our organization. Our organization name, Al Hayat Center for Civil Society Development. Al Hayat means life. We started 2006. A group of young, active youth started this organization, and we are working in 4 sectors. election monitoring, parliament monitoring, and government monitoring. 3 programs we are working from the beginning. And for the last 3 years, we added what we call it CVE, PVE program, preventing violent extremism and countering violent extremism. This is like a quick what we are doing. And before going to my intervention, just to give also a reminder about Jordan. Jordan can be considered one of the models for social cohesion. Our population from 1948 until now become like 5 times than the normal one. We received a lot of refugees from different countries, and more than 90% of those refugees entered to my country. They have full citizenship now, and they have political rights, and they are part of the society. So it can be considered also as a very important model. And this is my point to enter my intervention. For a long time, we are looking for social cohesion to integrate refugees and different demographic or ethnic in the society. But now we have a new, very important issue we need to take care about, which is the extremism or the ideology of extremism. People who started to go inside the mentality and the minds of our young people in the Middle East. It's not only in Jordan, and those people need serious effort to guarantee the social cohesion in the community. So the relation between social cohesion and violent extremism, it should be discussed and reviewed in different maybe UN conventions and others, because UN Convention for on Rights of the Child, talking about economic, social, health, and other rights. But we need, I think, to add the protection from extremism, especially the recruitment for children. There's a lot of reports talking about thousands of children. They are recruited by extreme groups recently in Middle East and North Africa. And maybe those people, not all of them, they want to be part of those extreme groups and fight with them, but they are there in our community, and this phenomena is growing, so we should take care about this. In a very short time, just to give an idea what as our organization is doing, try to deal with this issue. We developed an important program to encourage social cohesion and to work with young and youth who's like maybe targeted by extreme groups. So we are targeting schools, students through implementing set of community initiatives, aims to raise their awareness in how to protect themselves from online recruitment and how to deal with the extreme media content they might receive through different social media tools, such as informing their parents not forward or share any of those or reply to the messages coming from Facebook or WhatsApp. Also, we are targeting children by building the capacity of teachers and counselors to conduct awareness activities in PV, CVE issues. And also, we are creating a task force, national task force, including parents, teachers, counselors, community leaders, and other governmental parties to representative aims and review the current activities in the schools and try to develop the kind of schools that can protect the children. And also, we are targeting mothers of those students. They are in schools and universities, and giving them some context about early signs of extremism, because if you hear the stories from them, they don't know if this is like an early sign that her children or her son, who is also maybe in the university, he has this signs. But after you do the awareness for them, she starts saying, oh, my kids, they are doing this, but she don't know this is an early sign that maybe with a few time will lead this children or student in the university to join one of those groups. And we have in Jordan some cases that young women who joined ISIS in Syria, they recruited her from her family house in south of Jordan, and they recruited her, and she left the country alone to Turkey by online recruitment process. So if we need to keep our social cohesion, we should think about this serious challenge for social cohesion, which is that the extremism and the recruitment of youth and children, and we should add to all the convention, even from this conference recommendation, something solid to give a serious alarm for all the organization to work in this, because this is a serious challenge and it's growing. And most of our governments in Middle East and North Africa, they are hiding how much this is a problem. They don't want to be frank how much this is a problem. It's a serious problem, and we should be knocking the door about this problem. Thank you very much, and maybe during the discussion we can add more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayman. Also very interesting that your program focuses also on combating extremism and recruitment of young people who are, endangered to be influenced by these problems. Maybe we can learn about it also, because also in Austria we have this problem, yeah, and we have to face also these problems. For the third voice, I would like to welcome Mr. Mangan from the UNHCR, and you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. And is that working? Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad you're going to ask me to present the work of the UNHCR, not to sing and dance like the fantastic children which preceded us, otherwise I'd be sitting in front of a very empty room. First and foremost, as point of introduction, it's worthwhile saying from the off that child rights are central to UNHCR's work. Obviously they're enshrined in international law, the UNHCR, etc., but they do form the heart of UNHCR's protection mandate. As such, we work to implement the four guiding principles of the Convention and ensure that all children are able to access and, of course, realise their rights. This does not come without its issues or without its challenges. As an organisation with significant presence at local level, we're very aware of the challenges that implementing the rights of the child can bring. We've seen that over the last 3 years in Europe. We've received an unprecedented number of unaccompanied and separated children. Arrival numbers to Italy are increasing with more unaccompanied and separated children, taking the perilous central Mediterranean route, with over 25,000 unaccompanied separated children arriving in Italy in 2016, compared to 12,000, for example, in 2015. Furthermore, it was noted through the undertaking of mappings by the UNHCR to uncover policy and practice gaps at national level that child protection systems in many Western European countries are not properly equipped to answer the needs of these children, such as best interest considerations, child participation, provision of child-centred services, and quality alternative care arrangements like Astrid mentioned earlier. We found that the gaps are not necessarily linked to the legal status of the child per se, but more to the non-existence or overburdening of appropriate procedures and services for unaccompanied and separated children. Specifically, we've noted that the best interest of the child is not being given primary consideration in child protection processes at national level, and that procedural safeguards to ensure best interests are either not implemented or, unfortunately, they're ignored. So what actions have the UNHCR undertaken to address some of these issues? So we have, in a sense, undertaken a number of actions to address the gaps to support best interest considerations at national level. Chief amongst these is to strengthen child protection systems to ensure the well-being of unaccompanied and separated children. As such, we've developed a number of holistic procedural steps to implement the best interest principle for unaccompanied and separated children, as outlined in Article 3 of the Convention. These steps are practice-orientated. They range from the arrival of the child to their identification, straight through to identifying durable solutions for those children. As I don't have a lot of time, I would like to focus primarily on just two of these procedural steps, if you don't mind. The first of these is a best interest assessment. So a best interest assessment is essential to undertake to outline or to have a good overview of all actions affecting the individual unaccompanied and separated child, and should be part of a continuous process. It should be undertaken systematically once the child has been identified as unaccompanied, and until a durable solution for that child is implemented. It should include, amongst others, safe accommodation and care, age assessment, but only where necessary, and that's important to stress, family tracing, appropriate health, and of course, education provision. There are a number of BIA, or best interest assessment, should I say, safeguards that should be adhered to, namely provision of a guardian, which we touched on already, and we see there are problems with this, legal advice, process to complaint mechanisms, child-friendly information, and of course, child participation is also essential to undertaking any assessment with the child. Ideally, the best interest assessment should be undertaken by the National Child Protection Agency with input from other professionals, such as a child psychologist, for example. And just to mention that note, as a good practice on child-friendly information, UNHCR Austria office have developed a number of child-friendly information guides, one of which I have here, which is in German, but also in Arabic, if I'm not mistaken, which outlines the asylum process for children. Now, this information is developed in a very, very child-friendly way, like I said, but is also accessible through a number of different mediums. Maybe if you go for it. Now, the second step, very quickly just to touch upon, is best interest determination. Now, this is quite complex. Best interest determination is a formal procedure to determine a durable solution for an individual and unaccompanied child, addressing a child's care needs and protection needs, resulting in the development of recommendations regarding, for example, the child's integration or habitual residence, as long as it's in the best interest, again, of the child. Again, there are a number of safeguards that should be adhered to. Namely, it should have a multidisciplinary approach, so there shouldn't be just one professional undertaking this procedure, but a range of different professionals who can represent different aspects of the child's development. It should be chaired, ideally, by an independent body, and all recommendations, when developed, should be reasoned and adequately explained. And again, it should be explained in such a way that the child can understand the logic, and thinking behind these recommendations. Ideally, a best interest determination should be chaired, as I said, by an independent stakeholder with input from protection authorities, guardians, social worker, NGOs, a legal representative, and other relevant professionals. So that was very quickly some of the procedures we're undertaking. In terms of concretely speaking, what have the UNHCR done to promote this best interest, or the implementation, should I say, of best interest procedures at national level? I mean, one of the first things we have done is in 2013 to develop a publication called Safe and Sound. Now, Safe and Sound acts as a guidance for local authorities, child protection agencies, governments, NGOs, etc., to implement best interest procedures. Following up from that, specifically focusing on Western Europe, because of the identified issues and gaps there, we developed another publication called The Way Forward, which was launched in 2017, which really focused on, again, on the procedural steps, but breaking down the procedural steps and being very tangible in terms of what they mean and how they should be implemented at national level. But aside from all of this, at the moment we're undertaking, with the support of DG Justice under their Fundamental Rights and Citizenship Programme project, which has been undertaken in 7 countries, which again focuses on strengthening policy and practices for unaccompanied and separated children in Western Europe. This project focuses primarily on strengthening, or in some cases establishing, best interest procedures at national level through identifying the gaps in policy and practice, capacity building of guardians and development of training tools as well for professionals in their work with unaccompanied and separated children, and of course undertaking a rigorous evaluation of reception systems and centres for unaccompanied separated children through monitoring and participatory assessments, which obviously involve children. So that's, in a very small nutshell, the work we've been doing on this topic, but primarily focusing on best interest determination.
Thank you very much for your input here. I may forward the question of Mr. Heller. How many children have approached Europe, the European Union, or unaccompanied minor? How many have arrived since, let's say, 2014, 15?
I would say at this moment, those who've registered or those who've been identified, should I say, we're talking about 100,000.
100,000.
Yeah, in 2015 and 16, as Astrid.
Yeah. What I try to introduce, encourage a little discussion here on the floor. Having heard all this, what is your experience, for instance, Mrs. Winkler, with the authorities, for instance, in Austria, or if you could explore a little bit we have heard a lot of best practice guidelines and so on, but how is this implemented then by the authorities, by schools, by youth welfare authorities, and so on?
Well, this is not so easy to summarize in a few sentences, but I mean, we in Austria are facing the problem that child protection is under the jurisdiction of 9 federal provinces. Of course, we have a federal law on child protection, but the implementation is with the federal provinces. And well, this is one problem. And as I mentioned in my statement, I mean, the lack of resources is a problem everywhere, also in Austria. So the general budget, so to speak, for child protection and for children and youth work over the past 20 years was in no whatsoever way, increased according to inflation and, you know, all the indicators. So this is a problem, but the problems which children facing, I mean, not only the refugee children, the unaccompanied minors, but children in general, are getting bigger. My personal experience is there are a lot of committed social workers, social pedagogues working in the authorities, also in other countries to the extent I can overview. But I mean, they are simply lost very often. If they do not get training, if they do not have the room for working properly, doing all these really very good assessments, best interest of best interest determination and return decisions. I mean, this is very difficult. You have to make a really proper risk assessment, and this is very resource and time consuming. And sometimes, all these single cases which popping up recently. I mean, the Austrians will know the Chechenian family which received a forced return decision. So, for example, a child was taken off school, I mean, just out of the blue, right before the child could finish the school. The family was well integrated, the children also. So I really think we need to find ways to challenge the authorities with these decisions. And there are still very few cases, as far as I know, really concerning children and the violation of children's rights, which had been brought forward to the higher instances in the legal procedures. And well, I mean, my vision is that we find a way. I mean, I don't know what the terminology in English is. It's Klagsverband. So we have that for discrimination issues in Austria. It's basically an NGO which provides legal support. These are lawyers, and they provide legal support for discrimination cases. And I think we should think about to invent something similar for especially violation of children's rights.
Thank you so much, Mr. Magen.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Astrid has said. I mean, for me, in terms of implementation and effectively creating change, a key word is partnership and working together. On one hand, of course, challenging in some cases, but of course I think it's important that we work together, we have the buy-in from the local authorities, not just to strengthen the systems they have in place, but also to ensure the sustainability of any change that's created. And of course this means more human and financial resources, particularly when we talk about unaccompanied and separated children. I mean, we also have to call and pull on our expertise. As on the one hand, agencies like the UNHCR, but also NGOs as well, I mean, carry a lot of expertise which are valuable to governments, particularly when developing standards. And maybe on that note, as a practical example, I know again that our colleagues here in UNHCR Austria have developed recently legal standards for professionals, specifically on working with unaccompanied and separated children. And the reason for this is because they need to address a gap that isn't there in the education of legal professionals specific to this group of children. Again, when we talk about partnership, we also have to consider partnership with the children themselves. I mean, the experts in terms of an experience or how an experience or how of a system. Excuse me, the experts of a system and how a system is experienced. It really comes from the child themselves. So involving the child as well, who have arrived in the country, working with them through child participatory manners in child-friendly ways is one great way of being able to harvest, a lot of the information experience that they would also be able to share, again, to strengthen systems and to make sure that systems are more responsive as opposed to reactive to the needs of unaccompanied and separated children. So these are just very quickly two considerations that we should think about when implementing or looking to create some change.
Thank you. Before I hand the word over to you, I want to make a comment on what we have heard now, is that you can see on this that in German said, Recht haben und Recht bekommen ist nicht immer das Gleiche. It's saying having rights or having rights guaranteed, it's not the same. What I found very interesting, or looking into the Charter and the Children's Rights Convention, we see that the state actors, governments are obliged by themselves to protect the rights of the children. Yeah? They are under the obligation to take care of it. And now we hear that it's necessary that special advocacy for children is built up. For instance, you were talking about this Klagsverband. This is an NGO dedicated to provide for access to justice, access to courts for discriminated persons, amongst them children are here now. And we hear that UNHCR Austria, it's good to hear, is developing guidelines for children within facing the asylum proceeding, and we have to face, on the other hand, that the government should, on their own ex officio, we say in legal terms, should protect children's rights within these procedures, and this obviously is not yet always done. But to save the reputation of the high courts, I can say that there are some recent decisions, one by the Austrian Constitutional Court. There was a case from 2 Afghani children, and the Austrian Constitutional Courts held here in this decision that these children have to be, the situation of the children have to be brought into the focus of the case and not only of the adults. And that very often, if they come together with family, the rights of the adults are examined, but not in particular the rights of the children. And there is another decision of the Austrian Supreme Administrative Court, let's say my court, also saying that the interests of the child have to be weighted and have to be looked at seriously, apart from the rights of the adults, from the parents or other adults with whom they arrived in Austria. Last but not least, I would like to come back to Jordan. I found very interesting that, and yeah, this would be something I really would have also in our countries. You say that refugees are well integrated in Jordan. There is a long-term culture on social cohesion between the population, population of the country and the refugees, and that refugees have political rights as well. As you say, I find this very interesting. But I would like to ask you now a little bit more to tell us about combating extremism under youth in Jordan.
Thank you very much. Like one of the recent surveys done in Jordan about violent extremism in University of Jordan showed that almost 5% of the students, they don't believe that ISIS at that time last year, it's an extreme group. So this is like you are talking about almost 40,000 students in the university. So 5% who said frankly that they don't believe that this group is extreme group. This means that if you consider that some people, they will not say their opinion frankly in such an case, especially it was an online survey. So this means that the government, they can know who apply the survey. And on public level, we have another survey done, like 7% of Jordanian, they don't believe that this is an extreme groups. That give you how much this ideology is becoming a serious issue, and how many people they believe in those ideologies, and they can say their opinion in like louder voices. So it's a serious problem, but still, unfortunately, we don't have a serious strategies that working all the entities together that can make all of these efforts together. We have a very high political level support to fight extremism, especially from His Majesty the King. He's leading a serious effort in that, but the level of the government effort still not matching with this political level yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all three voices. Yes, I think this was a very interesting start off for the next panel. In the later morning, we will hear about other fields of protection of children's rights, basically also what's done in practice on the ground. Thank you for your attention.